The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Martin Wheeler carefully made his way toward Lucy's diner, his weathered cane tapping a gentle rhythm against the concrete sidewalk. At 93 years old, his steps were slower than they used to be, but his daily routine remained unchanged. Every morning at precisely 8 o'clock, he would make the 10-minute journey from his modest one-story house to the diner for breakfast. Today felt different, though. The usual peaceful morning atmosphere was disturbed by the loud rumbling of motorcycle engines that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. Martin's arthritic hands gripped his cane tighter as he approached the diner, where 5 large motorcycles were parked haphazardly across the parking spaces. The small bell above the diner's door chimed as Martin pushed it open, the familiar smell of coffee and bacon greeting him like an old friend. Lucy, the diner's owner for the past 30 years, gave him a concerned look from behind the counter. She had already set up his usual spot, the corner booth with a clear view of the street, but today it was occupied by leather-clad bikers. "Morning, Lucy," Martin called out, his voice still carrying the strength that had once commanded troops across European battlefields. She hurried over to him, worry lines creasing her forehead. "Martin, maybe you'd like to sit at the counter today," she suggested quietly, glancing at the rowdy group. The bikers were laughing loudly, their boots propped up on the seats, empty coffee cups and half-eaten plates of food scattered across the table. Martin straightened his back, standing as tall as his aged frame would allow. "No need to change my routine on account of new faces," he replied, making his way toward his usual booth. His military bearing, though diminished by time, had never left him. As he approached the booth, one of the bikers, a tall man with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos, noticed him. The biker's laugh died in his throat as he nudged his companions, all of them turning to stare at the elderly man who dared to approach their table. "Can we help you, old-timer?" the bearded biker asked, his voice carrying a mocking tone that made Lucy flinch behind her counter. Martin stood before them, his blue eyes sharp despite his advanced age. "Young man, I've had breakfast in this booth every morning for the past 15 years, he stated matter-of-factly. "I'd appreciate it if you allow me to continue that tradition." The bikers exchanged amused glances, and their leader leaned forward. "Well, isn't that something? 15 years, huh? And what makes you think we care about your tradition, Gramps?" The diner had grown quiet. The few other customers present watched the scene unfold with nervous anticipation. Lucy had already reached for the phone, her finger hovering over the keypad. Martin didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, worn photograph. Without a word, he placed it on the table. The photograph showed a much younger version of himself, standing proudly in his military uniform alongside his fellow soldiers. "Because, young man," Martin said quietly, "I didn't spend 3 years fighting in World War II to be intimidated in my own hometown diner." The biker's expression shifted slightly as he looked at the photograph, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "That was a long time ago, old man. Times have changed." "Indeed they have," Martin agreed, picking up his photograph and carefully returning it to his pocket. But respect never goes out of style. The tension in the diner was palpable as the biker leader stood up, towering over Martin. For a moment, it seemed like the situation might escalate, but then something unexpected happened. Another biker, who had been quietly observing from the end of the booth, spoke up. "Hey, boss, look at his jacket." All eyes turned to Martin's old army jacket, worn despite the warm weather, its medals and ribbons still perfectly arranged on the left breast. The biker leader's eyes narrowed as he studied them, and something in his expression changed, but whether it was respect or something else, no one could tell. "We were just leaving anyway," he finally said, tossing some bills on the table. "Come on, boys." The bikers filed out of the booth, their boots heavy on the diner's linoleum floor. As they passed Martin, each one gave him a different look, some curious, others dismissive, and their leader's gaze held something that almost looked like recognition. After they left, the roar of their motorcycles gradually fading into the distance, Lucy rushed over to Martin. "Are you all right?" she asked, helping him into his now vacant booth. Martin smoothed his napkin across his lap, just as he did every morning. "I'm fine, Lucy," he assured her. "Now how about that breakfast?" But as Lucy hurried off to get his usual order, Martin's hand unconsciously moved to touch the photograph in his pocket. Something told him this wouldn't be the last time he'd cross paths with those bikers, and next time, he'd be ready for whatever came his way. The following week proved challenging for Martin Wheeler. The bikers had made Lucy's Diner their regular morning hangout, arriving earlier each day to deliberately occupy his corner booth. Their presence had changed the peaceful atmosphere of the small-town diner into something tense and uncomfortable. On this particular morning, Martin pushed open the diner's door to find not 5, but 8 motorcycles parked outside. The loud laughter and crude jokes from the corner booth made several other customers shift uneasily in their seats. Lucy stood behind the counter, wringing her hands in worry as she watched Martin enter. "Good morning, Grandpa," the bearded leader called out mockingly. "Looking for your special seat again?" His companions snickered, some making exaggerated gestures mimicking Martin's slow, measured walk. Martin paused, leaning slightly on his cane. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows caught the metals on his jacket, making them gleam. A few of the newer bikers leaned forward, their eyes drawn to the decorations despite their attempt to appear unimpressed. "Actually," Martin replied calmly, "I thought I might join you this morning." His unexpected response caused several of the bikers to exchange surprised glances. The leader's eyes narrowed. "This ain't a retirement home, old-timer. We don't need your war stories." Martin pulled out a chair from a nearby table and sat down, positioning himself to face the group. "That's good," he said, "because I didn't come to tell any." His voice carried the same quiet authority that had once commanded respect on the battlefield. Lucy appeared at his side with his usual coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she set it down. The bikers watched this interaction with growing irritation, their leader particularly annoyed by Martin's apparent lack of intimidation. "You got some nerve, old man," one of the younger bikers growled, starting to rise from his seat. But the leader held up his hand, stopping him. "Let's have some fun with this," the leader said, a cruel smile playing across his face. He turned to Martin. "Tell you what, since you're so determined to hang around, why don't you prove you belong here?" Martin took a slow sip of his coffee, his steady hands a sharp contrast to Lucy's nervous movements. "And how would you suggest I do that?" The leader reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a worn deck of cards. "Simple. One hand of poker. You win, we'll leave you alone. You lose." He paused for effect. "You never show your face in this diner again." The other customers in the diner had gone completely silent, all pretense of eating abandoned as they watched the scene unfold. Lucy started to protest, but Martin raised his hand gently to stop her. "Interesting proposition," Martin said, setting down his coffee cup. "But if we're going to play, let's make it worthwhile." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made the leader's eyes widen. A small, worn leather pouch. "What's that?" the leader demanded, trying to mask his curiosity with aggression. Martin carefully opened the pouch and removed a tarnished set of military dog tags. "Something I've carried since 1945. Found these on a battlefield in Germany. Never knew who they belonged to, but they reminded me of all the brave men I served with." The leader's face changed almost imperceptibly as he stared at the dog tags. His right hand unconsciously moved to touch his chest, where, unknown to others, he wore his father's dog tags under his leather jacket. "If I win," Martin continued, "not only do you leave me in peace, but you get to learn the story behind these tags. If you win," he placed the tags on the table, "they're yours, along with my word that I'll never return." The atmosphere in the diner had shifted from tense to electric. Even the most hardened among the bikers seemed affected by the gravity of the moment. The leader's fingers drummed on the table as he considered the offer, his eyes never leaving the dog tags. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Deal the cards," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Let's see what you're made of, old man." As Lucy and the other patrons watched in anxious silence, Martin Wheeler prepared to play what might be his last hand in the diner he called home for 15 years, but in his eyes there was no fear, only the calculated determination of a man who had faced far worse odds and lived to tell about it. The cards whispered across the diner table as the biker leader dealt the hand. Martin's weathered fingers carefully lifted the corners of his cards, his expression remaining neutral despite the stakes. Lucy had stopped pretending to work, standing nearby with her order pad clutched tightly to her chest. "5-card draw," the leader announced, his voice carrying across the now silent diner. "Nothing wild, simple and clean." His eyes never left Martin's face, searching for any sign of weakness. Martin nodded, arranging his cards with the precision of a man who had played his share of poker during long nights in military barracks. The other bikers crowded around their leader, while the regular customers of Lucy's diner found excuses to linger over their coffee cups. As Martin studied his hand, he noticed something interesting about the leader's forearm. When the man reached to adjust his cards, his leather jacket sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing part of a military tattoo, one that Martin recognized immediately. It was the emblem of the 101st Airborne Division, the same unit Martin had served with during the war. "Your bet?" the leader prompted, interrupting Martin's thoughts. Martin looked down at his cards again. 2 kings, a queen, and 2 low cards. A decent starting hand, but nothing guaranteed. 2 cards, he said calmly, discarding the low ones. The leader smirked and took 3 cards himself. The new cards slid across the table, and Martin's heart quickened as he lifted them. Another king and a queen stared back at him. Full house. "Well, old-timer," the leader drawled, moment of truth. "What you got?" Instead of immediately showing his cards, Martin reached for the dog tags sitting between them. "These tags," he said slowly, "I found them near Bastogne. Winter of 44. The snow was so thick you could barely see 3 feet ahead." The leader's confident expression faltered slightly. "Bastogne?" he repeated, his voice suddenly less certain. "Yes," Martin continued, his fingers tracing the worn metal. "The 101st Airborne was surrounded there. The Germans demanded our surrender." He looked directly at the leader's partially visible tattoo. General McAuliffe's response was just one word: "Nuts." The leader's face had gone pale. His hand unconsciously moved to cover his tattoo, but it was too late. The other bikers looked confused by their leader's reaction, but Martin saw the recognition in his eyes. "How did you?" the leader started, then caught himself. "Just show your cards, old man." Martin laid down his full house, kings over queens. The leader stared at the cards for a long moment before slowly spreading his own hand, 2 pair, aces and 8s. "You win," the leader said quietly, pushing back from the table. But Martin wasn't finished. "The soldier these belonged to," Martin continued, picking up the dog tags, "fought alongside me in that frozen forest. He saved 3 men before taking a hit himself. I promised him I'd find his family, but records were chaos back then. All I had was a last name: Davidson." The diner fell into complete silence. The leader's hands were trembling as he reached beneath his shirt and pulled out his own set of dog tags. "Davidson," he whispered. "James Davidson, my father." Martin's eyes widened as he looked at the tags around the biker's neck, identical to the ones he held. "Your father was Jimmy Quick Draw Davidson." The leader, now revealed as Davidson's son, nodded slowly. He never talked much about the war. Died when I was 15, but he always said the 101st was his real family." Tears had formed in the corners of the biker's eyes, though he tried to hide them from his gang. Martin stood up slowly, holding out the old dog tags. "Then these belong to you, son. Your father was one of the bravest men I ever knew." The other bikers watched in stunned silence as their tough-as-nails leader gently took the dog tags, holding them like they were made of glass. The morning sun streaming through the diner windows caught the metal, making both sets of tags gleam like beacons of memory across the generations. "I think," the leader said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "we owe you more than just breakfast, sir." He turned to his gang. "Boys, I believe we've been disrespecting a hero." The next morning dawned different at Lucy's diner. Instead of their usual intimidating entrance, the bikers arrived early and parked their motorcycles neatly in the lot. Their leader, Jack Davidson, helped Martin from his car to the diner entrance, treating the elderly veteran with a respect that surprised the regular customers. "Please, Mr. Wheeler," Jack said, pulling out the corner booth seat, "tell me more about my father. All these years, I only knew him as the quiet man who never spoke about the war." Lucy brought coffee for everyone, her face beaming at the transformed atmosphere. The other bikers gathered around, their leather jackets and tattoos no longer seeming threatening as they listened intently to the elderly veteran's stories. "Your father," Martin began, his eyes distant with memory, "had the steadiest hands I'd ever seen. That's why we called him Quick Draw, not because he was fast with a gun, but because he could sketch anything in minutes. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, carefully unfolding it. Jack's hands trembled as he took the sketch, a detailed drawing of young soldiers huddled around a campfire. Dad drew this? Christmas Eve, 1944, Martin nodded. We were surrounded in Bastogne, temperatures well below freezing. Your father drew this to keep our spirits up. Said we needed to remember what hope looked like. The other bikers leaned in to see the sketch, their tough exteriors softening at the sight of such a personal piece of history. One of them, a younger man named Tommy, noticed something in the corner of the drawing. Sir, Tommy said, pointing to a small figure in the background, is that you? Martin smiled, adjusting his glasses to see better. Yes, that's me. Always standing guard. Your father used to joke that I never knew how to relax, even during Christmas. Jack carefully traced his finger over his father's signature at the bottom of the sketch. I have some of his drawings at home, he said quietly. Never knew he started doing them in the war. He drew every chance he got, Martin continued. Scenes from camp, portraits of the men, landscapes of places we passed through. Said it helped him hold on to his humanity in the midst of all that chaos. Lucy appeared with fresh coffee and her special cinnamon rolls, refusing to accept any payment. On the house, she insisted, for our heroes. As they ate, Martin shared more stories about Jimmy Davidson, how he once used his artistic skills to draw detailed maps of enemy positions, saving countless lives, how he would send sketches home to soldiers' families, giving them precious glimpses of their loved ones, how he kept the unit's morale up with his quick caricatures and gentle humor. The night he was wounded, Martin said softly, he was finishing a sketch. It was of the sunrise over the forest. Said he wanted to remember that there was still beauty in the world, even in war. Jack pulled out his wallet and carefully extracted a folded piece of paper. Is this it? He asked, showing Martin a weathered drawing of a sun rising through pine trees. Martin's eyes widened in recognition. Yes, that's it. He finished it just before. His voice trailed off, heavy with memory. Found it in his things after he passed, Jack explained. Never knew the story behind it. Always wondered why he kept it. The diner had grown quiet again, but this time with reverence rather than tension. The morning sun streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the table, reminiscent of the sunrise in Jimmy's last drawing. You know, Jack said, looking at his fellow bikers, we've been using our bikes to intimidate people, thinking it made us tough. But real toughness? He gestured to Martin and the drawing. This is what it looks like. The other bikers nodded in agreement, their respect for both Martin and their leader growing with each revealed connection to their shared past. Mr. Wheeler, Jack said formally, would you consider becoming our club's honorary member? We could learn a lot from you and, well, I'd like to know more about the man my father called friend. The next morning dawned different at Lucy's diner. Instead of their usual intimidating entrance, the bikers arrived early and parked their motorcycles neatly in the lot. Their leader, Jack Davidson, helped Martin from his car to the diner entrance, treating the elderly veteran with a respect that surprised the regular customers. Please, Mr. Wheeler, Jack said, pulling out the corner booth seat, tell me more about my father. All these years, I only knew him as the quiet man who never spoke about the war. Lucy brought coffee for everyone, her face beaming at the transformed atmosphere. The other bikers gathered around, their leather jackets and tattoos no longer seeming threatening as they listened intently to the elderly veteran's stories. Your father, Martin began, his eyes distant with memory, had the steadiest hands I'd ever seen. That's why we called him Quick Draw, not because he was fast with a gun, but because he could sketch anything in minutes. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, carefully unfolding it. Jack's hands trembled as he took the sketch, a detailed drawing of young soldiers huddled around a campfire. Dad drew this? Christmas Eve, 1944, Martin nodded. We were surrounded in Bastogne, temperatures well below freezing. Your father drew this to keep our spirits up. Said we needed to remember what hope looked like. The other bikers leaned in to see the sketch, their tough exteriors softening at the sight of such a personal piece of history. One of them, a younger man named Tommy, noticed something in the corner of the drawing. Sir, Tommy said, pointing to a small figure in the background, is that you? Martin smiled, adjusting his glasses to see better. Yes, that's me. Always standing guard. Your father used to joke that I never knew how to relax, even during Christmas. Jack carefully traced his finger over his father's signature at the bottom of the sketch. I have some of his drawings at home, he said quietly. Never knew he started doing them in the war. He drew every chance he got, Martin continued. Scenes from camp, portraits of the men, landscapes of places we passed through. Said it helped him hold on to his humanity in the midst of all that chaos. Lucy appeared with fresh coffee and her special cinnamon rolls, refusing to accept any payment. On the house, she insisted, for our heroes. As they ate, Martin shared more stories about Jimmy Davidson, how he once used his artistic skills to draw detailed maps of enemy positions, saving countless lives, how he would send sketches home to soldiers' families, giving them precious glimpses of their loved ones, how he kept the unit's morale up with his quick caricatures and gentle humor. The night he was wounded, Martin said softly, he was finishing a sketch. It was of the sunrise over the forest. Said he wanted to remember that there was still beauty in the world, even in war. Jack pulled out his wallet and carefully extracted a folded piece of paper. Is this it? He asked, showing Martin a weathered drawing of a sun rising through pine trees. Martin's eyes widened in recognition. Yes, that's it. He finished it just before. His voice trailed off, heavy with memory. Found it in his things after he passed, Jack explained. Never knew the story behind it. Always wondered why he kept it. The diner had grown quiet again, but this time with reverence rather than tension. The morning sun streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the table, reminiscent of the sunrise in Jimmy's last drawing. You know, Jack said, looking at his fellow bikers, we've been using our bikes to intimidate people, thinking it made us tough, but real toughness? He gestured to Martin and the drawing. This is what it looks like. The other bikers nodded in agreement, their respect for both Martin and their leader growing with each revealed connection to their shared past. Mr. Wheeler, Jack said formally, would you consider becoming our club's honorary member? We could learn a lot from you, and, well, I'd like to know more about the man my father called friend. Word spread quickly through the small town about the remarkable changes at the biker clubhouse. 1 month after Martin's first visit, the local newspaper decided to run a story about the unlikely friendship between the elderly veteran and the reformed biker gang. The morning the article was published, Lucy's diner was busier than ever. Look at this, Mr. Wheeler, Jack said, spreading the newspaper across their usual corner booth. The headline read, From Intimidation to Inspiration, How a World War II Veteran Transformed Local Biker Club. Martin adjusted his glasses, smiling at the photograph of himself surrounded by the bikers, all of them looking at one of Jimmy Davidson's sketches. They made me look younger than I am, he chuckled. The article detailed how the once feared biker gang had become community heroes. They now escorted elderly veterans to doctor appointments, organized art therapy sessions for returned soldiers, and even started a scholarship fund in Jimmy Davidson's name for aspiring military artists. Mayor wants to meet with us, Jack announced, pouring more coffee for Martin. Says he wants to discuss using the clubhouse as an official veteran support center. Lucy brought over her special blueberry pancakes, beaming with pride. And that's not all, she added. The elementary school called. They want Mr. Wheeler and the club to speak at their Veterans Day assembly. The other bikers, scattered around nearby tables, sat up straighter at this news. Tommy, who had become particularly close to Martin, spoke up excitedly. We could display some of Quick Draw's sketches, show the kids what real heroes look like. Martin watched these men he'd come to think of as family. Their leather jackets now bore a new patch, a sketching pencil crossed with a military sword, honoring both Jimmy Davidson's art and his service. The transformation went beyond their appearance. Their entire demeanor had changed. There's something else we need to discuss, Mr. Wheeler, Jack said, his voice growing serious. He nodded to Tommy, who hurried out to his bike and returned with a carefully wrapped package. The other diner patrons pretended not to watch as Tommy placed the package in front of Martin. With careful movements, Martin unwrapped it, revealing a beautifully crafted leather-bound album. Open it, Jack encouraged softly. Inside, Martin found something that took his breath away. The bikers had tracked down families of other soldiers from his and Jimmy's unit. Each page contained photographs, letters, and stories from these families, along with copies of Jimmy's sketches showing their loved ones. Took us weeks to find everyone, Tommy explained. But once we told them about you in quick draw, the stories just poured in. Martin's weathered hands trembled as he turned the pages. There was young Private Miller, whose grandson now served in Afghanistan. Sergeant Thompson, whose daughter had become a military artist herself, inspired by Jimmy's sketches. Lieutenant Brooks, whose great-grandchildren had never seen a picture of him in uniform until now. "This isn't just your story anymore, Mr. Wheeler," Jack said, placing a hand on the elderly veteran's shoulder. "It's becoming everyone's story. You're helping us remember what matters." The diner had fallen silent as other customers noticed Martin's emotional response to the album. Even Lucy had stopped serving to watch, wiping tears from her eyes with her apron. "You boys," Martin said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've done more than just remember. You've given these memories new life." A young girl from a nearby table approached timidly, clutching a drawing pad. "Mr. Wheeler," she asked shyly, "could you tell me about the war? I want to draw it, like Mr. Davidson did." Jack caught Martin's eye and smiled. The tough biker leader now had tears in his own eyes as he watched Martin pat the seat next to him, making room for the young artist. "Well, sweetheart," Martin began, as bikers and diner patrons alike gathered to listen, "let me tell you about some real heroes, starting with a brave man who fought with a pencil as well as a sword." The Veterans Day Assembly at Lincoln Elementary School brought an unexpected crowd. The gymnasium was packed with students, parents, and community members, all eager to see the unlikely partnership between Martin Wheeler and his biker guardians. Outside, a long line of motorcycles gleamed in the morning sun, each one polished to perfection for the special occasion. "Nervous, Mr. Wheeler?" Jack asked, adjusting Martin's metal-decorated jacket as they prepared to enter the gymnasium. The old veteran sat in a wheelchair today, a concession to the long hours ahead, though he insisted he could still walk. "Not at all, son," Martin replied with a smile, "though I think your hands are shaking more than mine." The bikers had transformed themselves for the event. Their leather jackets were immaculate, boots shined, and each wore a small pin featuring Jimmy Davidson's artist signature. Tommy pushed Martin's wheelchair while Jack carried a large portfolio containing selected sketches from his father. As they entered the gymnasium, the crowd fell silent. 500 elementary school students sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes wide at the sight of the elderly veteran surrounded by his protective circle of bikers. The school principal stepped up to the microphone. "Today," she announced, "we're honored to have some very special guests teach us about service, friendship, and the power of understanding." Jack took the microphone first, his usual tough demeanor softened by obvious emotion. "A few months ago, we were not the kind of men you'd want your children to meet," he admitted, looking out at the parents in the audience. "We thought being tough meant being feared. Then we met a real tough guy, Mr. Martin Wheeler." The students listened intently as Jack shared the story of their first meeting at Lucy's diner, many gasping when they heard how they had initially treated Martin. But their faces lit up as he described the poker game and the discovery of his father's dog tags. Then it was Martin's turn to speak. Tommy wheeled him to the microphone, and despite his insistence on standing, Jack gently convinced him to remain seated. "Children," Martin began, his voice strong despite his age, "true strength isn't about intimidation. It's about lifting others up, just like these men now do every day." The bikers began displaying Jimmy's wartime sketches on large easels, each one accompanied by a story. The students were particularly moved by a sketch of soldiers sharing their rations with hungry local children. "Mr. Davidson drew this," Martin explained, pointing to the sketch, "to remind us that even in war, we must keep our humanity. His son Jack and these good men now continue that legacy of kindness." As if on cue, the gymnasium doors opened, and several young veterans from the clubhouse's art therapy program entered, carrying their own artwork. The students' eyes widened as they saw modern-day soldiers' experiences captured in pencil and paint, inspired by Jimmy Davidson's example. One small boy raised his hand. "Mr. Wheeler, were you scared in the war?" Martin leaned forward in his wheelchair. "Yes, son, I was. We all were. But Mr. Davidson taught us something important. When you're scared, create something beautiful. It helps you remember the good in the world." The assembly concluded with an unexpected announcement. The mayor stepped forward to present Martin and the biker club with a community service award. But Jack had one more surprise. In honor of Mr. Wheeler and my father, he declared, our club is establishing a new tradition. Every year, we'll sponsor an art contest for students to draw what service means to them. The winner's art will hang in our clubhouse alongside my father's sketches. As the children cheered, Martin looked around at his unlikely family of bikers. Tommy stood tall and proud, while Jack wiped away tears he couldn't quite hide. The other club members watched the excited students with gentle smiles that would have seemed impossible just months ago. You know, Jack, Martin said softly, your father would be proud, not just of the art, but of the men you've all become. 1 year had passed since that first tense morning at Lucy's diner. The autumn leaves danced across the parking lot where dozens of motorcycles stood in neat rows, their chrome surfaces gleaming in the early morning light. Today was Martin Wheeler's 94th birthday, and the entire town had gathered to celebrate. Lucy had outdone herself, transforming her diner into a makeshift museum. Jimmy Davidson's sketches lined the walls, interspersed with photographs documenting the remarkable year of friendship between the elderly veteran and his biker guardians. The corner booth, once the site of confrontation, now bore a small brass plaque reading Hero's Corner, where brotherhood knows no age. Looking sharp, Mr. Wheeler, Tommy said, adjusting the new leather vest they'd given Martin. It matched their own, complete with the pencil and sword patch, but also displayed his military medals and a special patch identifying him as the club's honorary commander. Jack Davidson stood at the diner's entrance, greeting guests. The tough biker leader had changed dramatically over the past year. He'd started counseling younger veterans, using his father's art and Martin's stories to help them heal. The clubhouse, now officially recognized as the Wheeler-Davidson Veterans Support Center, had become a sanctuary for service members from across the state. Attention! Jack's voice suddenly rang out. The bikers, many of them veterans themselves, snapped to attention as Martin entered the diner. Behind him, a line of elementary school students marched in, each carrying an artwork from the first annual Wheeler-Davidson art contest. At ease, soldiers, Martin chuckled, his eyes twinkling. Today's about celebration, not ceremony. Lucy brought out a massive birthday cake decorated with an edible version of Jimmy Davidson's sunrise sketch. As she set it down, she whispered to Martin, "Did you ever imagine that morning would lead to all this?" Martin looked around at the gathered crowd. The mayor chatted with former gang members about expanding the Veterans Art Program. Young veterans from the therapy group showed their latest sketches to admiring families. Children darted between the adults, wearing paper military caps and carrying toy sketchbooks. "Mr. Wheeler," Jack said, calling for everyone's attention, "we have something special for you." He nodded to Tommy, who wheeled in a covered easel. With careful movements, Jack removed the cover, revealing a stunning oil painting. It showed the interior of Lucy's diner, but not as it might have looked during World War II. Young soldiers sat at the counter, while in the corner booth, a young Martin Wheeler watched Jimmy Davidson sketch. The style perfectly matched Jimmy's wartime drawings. "Found an artist who could recreate Dad's style," Jack explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Wanted you to see yourself the way he would have drawn you back then." Martin reached out to touch the canvas, his hand trembling. "It's perfect," he whispered, like stepping back in time. The celebration continued throughout the morning. Stories were shared, memories honored, and new friendships forged. The bikers had arranged for several World War II veterans from neighboring towns to attend, creating an impromptu reunion that brought tears to many eyes. As the party wound down, Martin sat in his corner booth, surrounded by his leather-clad family. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "a year ago, I thought I was just defending my breakfast spot. Never imagined I'd gain a whole new family." Jack placed his hand on Martin's shoulder, "And we never imagined an old veteran would teach us what real strength looks like. Dad would be proud of all of this." "He is proud," Martin said firmly. "Every time you help a veteran, every time you inspire a child, every time you choose kindness over fear, his spirit lives on." The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, catching the brass black and making it shine. In that golden light, surrounded by art, honor, and love, Martin Wheeler celebrated not just his 94th birthday, but the power of understanding to transform lives. The corner booth that had once witnessed confrontation now stood as a testament to the enduring strength of brotherhood, proving that it's never too late for hearts to change and heroes to rise.